storytellers and story lovers. Welcome to West of the Page with Ronan Weatherford Publishing. This is the place where authors open up, ideas unfold, and the indie spirit writes its own story.
I'm Lindsay Flanagan, author, editor, and publisher.
I'm Stacey Gonzalez, the social media manager.
I'm Janae Thornton, executive editor.
I'm Alan Smith, director of sales and marketing.
And I'm Sabina Berlin, author, editor, and publisher.
Reavis Wortham is a New York Times best-selling author with 20 novels to his name. He has received multiple accolades, including 2 Spur Awards from the Western Writers Association and 6 Will Rogers medallions. His debut historical Western, The Rock Hole, part of the Red River series, was recognized by Kirkus Reviews as one of the top 12 mysteries of 2011. Wortham also writes Sony Hawk contemporary westerns, the Tucker Snow thrillers, and recently launched a Western horror series beginning with Comancheria. He lives in Northeast Texas with his wife, Shauna, and keeps a playful sense of mystery about his exact location. In addition to his novels, Reavis served as the editor of the Rough Country and Hard Country anthologies, curating and shaping stories from a diverse group of authors to benefit the U.S. Marshals Survivors Benefit Fund. Welcome to West of the Page, Reavis. Tell us about your experience with editing the anthologies. You joked about using garlic to ward off Casey's pitch of having you edit them. What was going through your mind in that moment, and did you ever feel cursed by taking the project?
Well, at first I thought I'd lost my mind by agreeing. And thank you very much, Stacey and Lindsay. It's an honor to be here today and talk to you guys. Casey came to me some time ago after talking with Mark Cameron and asking me if I would be interested in editing a collection of short stories for the Survivors Fund. Mark is a retired U.S. Marshal, and I've known him for many years, and I love being with Mark. We get together as much as we can, and I love Casey. He's a great guy. And so after Casey asked me to do this and told me it was for the Marshals Survivors Fund, I couldn't turn him down. I love law enforcement. I love the folks that do this for a living, that put their lives on the line. And a lot of my best friends are law enforcement officers. And so I jumped at the chance to give a little. I love to be able to help people out. And the idea at first was daunting. I wasn't sure if I was capable of doing it, but I knew a lot of authors that might be interested. And I've been in this business since 2011, and I've met a lot of folks and a lot of very close friends or authors. And so I thought, well, I'll give these guys a shout. So I told Casey, yeah, I'll give it a shot. Let me call a few folks that I know, touch base with them, see if I can generate any interest. And I put together a list of authors with the help with my wife, Shauna, with Sandra Brannon, with Mark, and my brother from another mother, John Gilstrap. We talked for a little while and put together a list. And then I started reaching out to these folks, and I was overwhelmed by their generosity, almost to a person. They agreed to do this. One person couldn't because of a deadline, and he was unable to do it, but he sent his regrets, and he said if we ever do anything like this again, he'll give it a shot. So out of all the authors that I reached out to, the response was overwhelming, and I didn't know, I couldn't back out at that point. I was already in too deep, and I was so excited because there's some of those folks I have not met. I hadn't had the opportunity to talk to them. And so it gave me a different platform to learn from, to visit with these people, to get to know authors that I probably wouldn't have ever met at conventions or whatever. And so it worked out just fine for me. And you know, I talked to Casey about it later, and I told him, I said, thank you very much for letting me do this. This helped me grow as well as grow what we're trying to put together.
I was wondering if any of the authors surprised you with a story so different from their usual style that you had to do a double take at their work.
They all blew me away. I don't recall offhand how many short stories that we have in these 2 volumes, but it expanded out to be 2 volumes because I couldn't turn any of them down. I fully expected to get submissions that I felt wouldn't fit or that weren't quite within the parameters of what we were looking for. And as I read them, I was stunned because a lot of these folks use their style to write something set in contemporary West. People that have never written a Western or contemporary Western before. So as I read through these, I realized that I was in trouble. I had way too many short stories for one volume. It was going to turn into a Stephen King tome if we'd have printed them in one. And I couldn't bring myself to tell folks that it isn't quite right, because it was never not quite right. They were always beyond what I expected. And so I called Casey. I said, we're in trouble. And I think poor Casey thought, well, people are turning him down left and right. And he said, what's the problem? I can't turn any of these authors down. These are good stories. They're great stories. I fully expected the New York Times bestsellers. I knew I was going to get something great from them, but I didn't expect the diverse world that they opened up to me. Our original parameters were, it had to be between 1900 and today. Well, I got one short story that was set in 1832. And I couldn't turn it. It was so well written and so engrossing that I couldn't get rid of it. So I said, well, okay, then I don't care. We'll take whatever comes through. And then I get another one that's post-apocalyptic, and it just blew me away also. Well, all these folks just gave me their best, not expecting any type of monetary return, because they all knew what this is for. This is our donation, our craft, in a form that we can put into a volume so that people can enjoy their work, and at the same time help the survivors of our law enforcement officers that have fallen in the line of duty. It was stunning, and I am so honored to be part of it.
Well, I know that every author we've spoken to so far has just said what an honor it is to be included. So,
and to work with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that may be a stretch. These are all good folks. They're the ones that they knew that are friends. They were fun to work with, and I made some new friends that a couple of them I have not yet met. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Hopefully at the release or at sometime in the near future.
So speaking about the authors, if you could sit around an anthology campfire with all of these authors, which question would you want most to ask them about their stories or creative choices?
I would like to know if their stories had some truth to them. Some of them are. Some might have them. I'd like to know where they came from, what sparked those stories. I mean, Kathleen Gear turned a story in that was shocking in its depth, and it was a hard-hitting story that I did not expect. And I know she's a wonderful writer, but I did not expect that kind of a story out of Kathy. And so that one was a wonderful surprise.
Well, and you told a story in this too.
Well, I really didn't want to. Casey talked me into doing it. He said, if you're going to edit it, you need to put one in. And so I had this old short story that I had written years ago that I reworked for this anthology, and it turned out better than I had hoped. And then it was the more I thought about it, the more I read it, the more I worked on it. And let me tell you, the vast majority of the submissions were almost error-free. Did very little editing on them. Just check a couple of grammatical things, or maybe a missed plot point or something. But it was my miss. It wasn't the author's. I did more editing on my own short story than these guys that I worked on. And so I had this old short story. I liked it. I used it, and now I liked it so much that I have I wove it into a future novel that's going to be coming out. So it's just serving two purposes. One, it's a short story standalone, and then it will seamlessly blend into another novel.
So why don't you just tell us a little bit about the story?
About where the road forks?
Yeah.
It's a wow, you almost had me on the spot here for a second. It's a story about two Texas Rangers at the tail end of the Old West, and they're still on the chase of a murderer, a bank robber, and your traditional bad guy, but they're chasing him down in a Model T Ford, while the bad guy escapes on horseback, and they finally track him down in a small town down in Southwest Texas. And his name's Curly Red, the nickname that he has. Well, Curly Red is not just your typical bad guy. Curly Red has a backstory that is delivered in about 3 paragraphs, and you find out that he is an outlaw, but he also was a kid at one time. And so when they finally capture him, he goes down fighting, but he goes down fighting in his old home place, and they find a box that he has hidden. That's the reason he came back. He made his final stand at this old home place, and he knew what his fate was going to be. He wasn't going to be taken, wasn't going to go to prison. So he made his final stand there where he grew up. But in a box that the Rangers find, it's full of items that show you that even bad guys were kids at one time. And so the story ends with them wondering, where did the road fork for this guy? He didn't go, he went to become an outlaw, whereas by all indications of what they found, he could have become a Texas Ranger also. So where the word forks explores where people can go wrong in their lives.
I feel like that really adds like that sense of, complexity to the characters and, relatability, right? Because even our villains can be connected to in some way. And I just love that. So, which of the characters, your main characters, you got Tom, Jack, Red, Juan, which character do you personally relate to the most and why?
My daughters say that I'm a lot of my characters. And so I guess the one I relate to is the one I relate to is me, I guess, in that position in the early 1900s. But the deal about short stories is you have to take all that backstory if you're going to do this and pack it really tight. And so even your minor characters, such as Juan, the old man sitting outside in the dark smoking cigarettes outside of a saloon in a small border town down on the Rio Grande, he has a backstory. His granddad was his great granddad was at the Alamo. He watched Santa Anna come through. So there's a backstory here. Had he stepped up and tried to stop or become part of Santa Anna's army or did anything, he could not have been there. So the dominoes had not fallen the wrong way, and they'd fallen the right way to put Juan there at that time to talk to the Rangers, to explain to the Rangers, yeah, there was a guy that used to live here, and he was redheaded, and he's the guy you're looking for, and he's just from out of town somewhere. So anybody that writes novels understands you need backstory, you need characters with depth, but if you're trying to pack that into a really tight box, and it's hard to get all that in there, and that's why it took me so long to rewrite it over and over and over to get it exactly where I wanted the story.
I love that you kind of incorporate, tidbits of yourself into the characters and into real life. Let's kind of shift over to Red a little bit. You had mentioned that, you're going to these forks, right? They have these forks in the road what really changed for Red? Do you feel like it was, a product of his environment, or do you just kind of like feel like it has to do with his choices?
It has to do with our whole lives have to do with choice. You turn left, you turn right. You get one job, it leads you somewhere. You get a different job, it leads you somewhere else. I mean, my wife and I have talked about how we got together through just left and right turns that brought us together. We could have gone another direction. She was a newspaper reporter that got a job in school public relations. I was a school public relations person that really wanted to be an architect. And so because of the choices we made over the years, we ran into each other. And that's what happened with Red. He was a young, very influential kid, or a kid influenced by others around him. and he took up with a guy that was a bad guy. I mean, and my mom and dad always told me, you know, you become who you hang out with. You know, or as my dad would say, you lay down with dogs, you get up with fleas. That's the way Dad always put it when I was a kid. And so they, you know, choose your friends wisely. Well, Red chose to follow a guy that acted like he was pretty cool. He was a tough guy. Nobody bothered him. He was somebody that this kid looked up to, but he looked up to the wrong kind of guy. And then, the man that he looked up to was an outlaw himself, and was finally paid for it with his life at some point before we ever meet him. We just hear about it in the backstory. And so, because this kid was influenced by this bad guy, he went that way. Had he run into a Texas Ranger or a sheriff or just a good, hardworking man, he would have probably turned out differently. He could have just been a rancher at some point. But he you know, life was full of choices, and he took the wrong choice. He took the wrong fork, and that's the whole crux of the story. Which way you can go, left or right, and then you make decisions. At the end, he could have thrown up his hands, say, "I surrender," and they would have taken him. He would have paid for his crimes. Instead, he chose to take a different way out, and ultimately he paid for it with his life instead.
I kind of feel like it was very pivotal for Red when he discovered, those childhood treasures. How might that have been, like, how would that have affected him if he had never connected with that?
If Tom, I mean, if the Rangers had not found the box, they wouldn't have. It caused them to question life itself. It caused them to wonder exactly what they could have done, or what their roles could have been. And that was at the end of the story. The Rangers are sitting there talking about why the kid went bad, and they could have just as easily done the same thing themselves. And the little box of treasures that they found, they're some of them were treasures that I had when I was a kid. I had them in a box, and I had them hidden in my granddad's barn. And in fact, there was one of them is an ambrotype that meant nothing to me. I don't know if you don't know what an ambrotype is. And I was always into photography as a kid. It's the glass slide that you see a lot of times, but it's a negative. It's reversed. But if you put it on a black background, then you get an image. It came before 10 times. And I had an ambrotype of an older lady. My grandmother gave it to me, and all I knew was she was Miss Apple. That's all we know. And that she lived in a house before my grandparents lived there, and they found it behind a fireplace or something. And so it was the photo of Miss Apple, and I thought that was just a fantastic find. I mean, that's history to me. I love history, and I love stories. I grew up listening to stories from the old man up on a country porch. I don't know if you guys had such where you grew up, but in East Texas, we had little grocery store. They weren't even stores. They were just one room frame buildings that people sold dry goods out of, and then they also sold fruit and vegetables or whatever. But it was just a mom and pop operation, and on the front of these was always a little porch, covered porch, and old men who were younger than I am today, but they were old men to me. They sat on those porches and told stories, and I would sit there and listen to them. And I figured out real quick as a kid, if you're really quiet and you're really still, they forget you're there. And I gained quite an education just quiet and listening to these guys talk, and I got stories. I probably heard stories I shouldn't have heard as a kid, but I gathered those stories up, and then they led to me becoming a writer. Well, this image of Miss Apple was so valuable to me that I put it in this little box, and with some other things that I marble, and some other things that meant something to me. And it was my lucky marble, all the lucky stuff. And so because of all of those in that box, then that came out for the book. Now, full disclosure, there's also another Texas writer named Fred Gibson. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Fred. He wrote a short story, which was included in one of his books, and it was a very similar story about, and that's what sparked my idea. Is a very similar story about a good guy going bad. So I stole a little bit from Fred Gibson, and I'm honored to tell you that I did, because he's a great writer, and he influenced my writing voice so much that sometimes I see my words come up and I'm thinking this is a lot like what Fred Gibson would have written. But we all borrow from everyone else. We get our voices from different places, and this is almost a Larry McMurtry type story too. It's about a world that we hear about, that we think we know about, but that kind of history probably didn't really occur. But it's great to think about.
I just love to see and pin, I wish I had a little board where I could, put pins and string where all of our the ideas come from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just incredible to talk with authors and see, their creative juices, if you say.
Let me flip it over. What between the two Rangers, which one was your favorite, and why did you like those characters?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Trying to think here.
I'll just say I like Curly Red because
That's what I was gonna say. I was actually gonna say I'm not sure about it. I feel like I'm usually on the villain side of things.
Okay, well, that's okay. We find things that we like that attract us, and I have a redheaded daughter, so I understand that completely. And I call her Red or Rusty all the time. So
Yeah.
Redheads figure predominantly in my Sunny Hawk series. He's redheaded. And that leads to problems sometimes when he's out in the desert and he gets sunburned so easily. So you have to think about these things.
I just love the complexity with villains and our our antagonists of our stories, because there's a lot to them and there's so many layers, and sometimes I just find that it's like easier to connect with characters when we can see everything, their good and their bad choices.
That's true. And that's one thing my agent told me a long time ago when she first picked me up. She goes, I like your bad guys. She says, you really create good bad guys. Well, that says something about us all, doesn't
it? I keep seeing this sweatshirt that I want to get, and it says dibs on the villain.
There you go. And sometimes I really do. I'm like you. Sometimes I really kind of like the bad guy. I was watching a movie the other day. I can't even tell you what the movie is, but before it was over with, I'm kind of thinking, this is good psycho. Man, the guy's psychotic, but he's funny, and I liked the way he was portrayed in the movie. So, and when you get a bunch of writers together, they always wind up talking about movies anyway. So it's just it's one of the hazards of the business.
If we switch from the bad guys and go to the traditional good guys, you mentioned your respect for law enforcement and first responders, and so talk to us about how that influenced your approach to curating these stories. I know Casey came to you with the idea of benefiting the U.S. Marshals and Mark Cameron. How did that, talk to us a little bit more about that and kind of how you came up with the parameters for the stories?
Well, Casey and I, we tried to narrow it down a little bit because we didn't want a short story anthology of all Old West. The Old West has been done so many times, and we wanted something a little different. So we came up with the idea of a modern Western, and we wanted to see what these guys did. Jeffrey Deaver, his story is about cars and bad things that happen on a highway. Everyone that gave me a short story, all these short stories that came through, they were not what I expected. I wanted in my mind something kind of like what I write. And I guess that's kind of conceit in some way. And I apologize for that. But the best part of was they didn't follow my mental instructions. They did what they wanted to do, and we have a post-apocalyptic short story in there that it was so interesting. And I loved every bit of it. Craig Johnson, he has a story in there, and it's about a musician. It's not a chasing gunfight kind of story. It's a sweet story about a sheep herder, a Basque sheep herder that loves music. And I didn't expect to like it. And all of a sudden I read this story. I thought, this is pretty doggone good. I really like the way this came out. So all the stories, they fit perfectly. I originally I wanted one story for each different decade. I thought that'd be cool. And I asked the people, I figured I'd get 10, 15 stories I could plug into the decades from 1900 to, maybe 2000, somewhere in there. But the stories that I got couldn't be categorized. Jack Stewart, he's a good friend of mine, a Top Gun pilot. He wrote a story about a guy and about the mail being delivered in an airplane in the 20s, I believe, or it might have been the 30s.
World War One.
Yeah. And so I didn't expect airplanes. I'm thinking cowboys and horses, and here I get airplanes, And so all the authors that put some thought into this, thought out way outside the box that I was thinking about and that I had planned. And because of that, it's a much, much better compilation of stories. We have 2 volumes just packed full of stories by some great authors, people that I wouldn't try to list all of them because they're I don't want to leave anyone out. And we had some other authors. Jonathan Mayberry, I knew of Jonathan, but I'd never read any of his stuff. And then all of a sudden now I'm hooked on the guy. And you see the shelves behind me. I have a lot of bookshelves and they go forever. And they keep going forever.
It's impressive.
Yeah. And so the problem is now I got to figure out where to put Mayberry's books when I buy them because I've got to read all of his books. So it's a wonderful dilemma. To have such talented friends and talented associates. And I wouldn't, as my granddad would say, I wouldn't take for it. It's just a wonderful thing.
I know we've really enjoyed talking to the authors that we have talked to and how they have felt just, inspired and honored. And we've asked them all, what drew you personally to contributing to this anthology, knowing that it was benefiting the U.S. Marshals. You not only contributed, but you contributed in a huge way. And I know you're going to be at the event, and just was curious how you were feeling about all of that. I'm sure it's just been a ride.
Oh, it has been a ride, and it's been exciting, and it's been fulfilling. I don't know. You can't predict what's gonna sell. If 4 million books come out every year in the United States, it's a fire hose of novels, and you don't know what is going to happen. But I can tell you this: it has influenced me. It's impacted me already. And I haven't even been out to the Marshals Museum, and I haven't talked to the people that are going to be out here in Fort Smith here in the next month or so. But I know that I have been impacted by writing this story and putting it in the book. And whether we make $1,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, hopefully, but no matter what we make, those funds are going to impact some family that's lost a loved one, and it might help a little bit. And that's all we can do. We can send money, and we all donate money to good causes. This might be an ongoing process that helps people that need a little bit. And if nothing else, it's going to tell them, we appreciate your family. And we're so sorry for what has happened, but we're honored to be associated with these folks in law enforcement.
Well, I know on behalf of Rowan Weatherford and, Casey and all the other authors, thank you so much for all the work you did on this. And I am so excited. I will be in Fort Smith, so I will get to meet you face to face.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. And just thanks again for taking some time with us tonight and chatting with us. And I'll see you in Arkansas.
I would hope to see everybody and everyone's welcome. I have a lot of friends, and I'm inviting folks that I know in law enforcement, retirees. They're welcome to come out. They can come to this event. and be a part of what we're putting on. So, we're getting that kind of support from people who believe in what we're doing and are supportive of law enforcement officers throughout this great country.
Thank you for joining us. If you loved going beyond the margins with us today, subscribe and come back for more stories. Keep reading, keep writing, and we'll see you next time on West of the Page.